Okay, it looks like that's working. I apologize, everybody. So we are Library Juice Press. Do check us out. We have a lot of great books coming out recently. We also have a couple of journals looking at the critical investigations of various library angles, including digital librarianship. We are on all the socials. Do take a look and follow along. We have a lot of fun stuff going on. Our sister organization is Library Juice Academy, where we do ongoing education for librarians and archivists and all of us in that sphere. We've got a couple of upcoming courses that might be of interest to folks joining us today, including Becoming an Inclusive and Supportive Supervisor, Examining Institutional Racism in Libraries, Introduction to Collection Development. You can see all of those and more at libraryjuiceacademy.com. And that is everything I wanted to say. I'm so happy at this point to step back and turn it over to the editors, today's title, to run the show. Thank you all very much.
Hello, and thank you, Sophie, for that wonderful introduction and informative overview of Library Juice Press and Litwin books. My name is Jason Phillips. I'm a social science librarian at the University of Central Florida. I'm one of the co-editors of Censorship is a Drag. Jordan?
Hi, all. I'm Jordan Ruud. I'm the Director of Library Services at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith.
And I'll add, I am doing this from home, so you may see my cats make cameos. Please give me your forbearance. Jordan and I first started out with this journey with the series editor, Emily Drabinski, back in 2022, with the idea that we wanted to examine how academic libraries are facing censorship issues. That was kind of the pitch that we made. This is based on experiences that we shared together in our nearly 9 years of working together in Arkansas. So we did our call for proposals and received a lot of great responses that prompted us to widen the scope of the book, just based on what we were hearing from our other co-authors. So we opened it up to public libraries, to school libraries, to archives, and ended up with Censorship is a Drag, with the current book that was published just last month. Jordan.
I would also add, the angle that we decided to run with for this is, we focus, as everybody knows, on LGBTQ censorship in libraries. And I think that originates certainly in some of our experiences, but also, honestly, in the perception that it's really an underexplored area. Books about censorship, I don't want to say that they're a dime a dozen, because that sounds dismissive toward the important work that people are doing in this area. But we really found in doing our lit review that there is not a whole lot, or prior to our book, there wasn't a whole lot out there dealing with the specifics of LGBTQ censorship. So with the intellectual and social climate of the United States at the time when we began, editing this project, with, the increasing threats from, groups like Moms Against Liberty, or I say Moms Against Liberty, little Freudian slip there, Moms for Liberty, with, all the business going on around drag story times, which were really, under the gun at the time. That was the particular angle that we decided to run with. And we were honestly so pleased with the number and the quality of submissions that we got for this project. It made it very clear that we're not the only ones who experienced some of the things under discussion in this book. We're not the only ones who really thought that a toolkit for this area would be beneficial. So that was sort of the pitch that we ended up with.
And we hope that our audience, that the people that pick up a copy of Censorship is a Drag, will find the toolkits in each of the chapters useful. We have some great chapters that kind of set up some of the intellectual underpinnings of what's going on with stochastic terrorism. We're going to hear from Bryn Nelson about that today. So kind of having an understanding of, maybe what this is based in, and then seeing how it's playing out in different libraries and the archives, the school libraries, the academic libraries, the public libraries. And we're going to hear from an assortment of people today about that, some of our co-authors. And we're joined today with co-authors from both Ireland and from the Philippines. So we're very thankful for them for joining us at the odd hours they are. Jordan and I also co-authored 3 of the chapters in the book. We kind of had an idea that there were certain elements that we were looking for within this book. We are open to, ideas from everyone with our call for proposals, and we got a lot of great contributions. But there were three areas that we wanted to address, and so we co-authored, or I solo authored, three of the chapters in the book about collection development policies and the importance of having a good, strong collection development policy, talking about kind of the effects that being an advocate, being a queer person in a library can have, as it's manifested in queer battle fatigue, which is a concept that's starting to emerge in the scholarship. And then our third chapter, Jordan, if you want to jump in.
I think our third chapter really focuses on the personal toll of all this. So essentially, our book is a toolkit. We mean to offer prescriptive advice about, and our authors offer prescriptive advice about how to deal with these situations. But you can't help but bring the personal to your work. You are the person who's doing this stuff. You have an investment in it. It's your personality and your experience and everything that makes you who you are that you're bringing to bear on this. And inevitably, when aspects of your own identity, as an LGBTQ person or an ally, really, are under attack, you're going to end up feeling attacked in that it becomes personal. So really, I think our third chapter kind of focuses on the personal stakes of all this. What does it end up meaning for you, and what are some ways that you can sort of resist the, like Jason says, queer battle fatigue that may result from an adversarial attitude toward your collections and your programming.
So with that, we'd like to open it up and do introductions of the authors of our book, the first that we'll introduce. And we're going to go in chapter order today. The first we'll introduce is Bryn Nelson. So Bryn, if you want to join us and introduce yourself and talk, briefly about your chapter.
Sure. First, thank you so much for allowing me to participate in the project. Hello, everyone from Seattle. I'm an author, a freelance science writer, and a former microbiologist based here in Seattle. And my participation in this basically came from a book that I wrote on the science and value of poop. And so that seems like a very odd way into this. But basically, I was really fascinated with the psychology of disgust and then the weaponization of disgust. And that really led me down a whole rabbit hole into the research of and the history of stochastic terrorism. And that's a term that may not be familiar to a lot of people, so I just will briefly explain that. But basically, this is a longstanding tactic used to terrorize people. It's a chain of events. You have a speaker, an amplifier, and then the receivers or the listeners. And it really starts with public authorities, celebrities, influencers, others who have an audience, starting with specific denunciations, vilifications, dehumanization. And this is all designed to elicit a sense of disgust or contempt. This message is then amplified. And we're seeing this, of course, throughout social media, but also, other channels, TV, radio. And then it can inspire dangerous criminal acts by others, either intimidation, threatening institutions, and in this case, specifically libraries, schools, librarians, and in some cases actually leading to violence. And so the idea is that this is a tactic used to force a social or political change. So I lay out some of the history of this, some of the ways that in which this is been used specifically against libraries and librarians, but then also what communities, libraries, librarians can do to fight back. And so there is a toolkit there as well. So I hope that this creates an awareness, but also a sense that this isn't inevitable, that there are successful ways that communities have fought back. So that's essentially the chapter. Thanks.
Thank you, Bryn. Next up is Patricia Tully.
Well, I was going to say good morning, everyone, since it's morning here. But hello, everybody. I'm so happy to have been a part of this project. My name's Pat Tully. I'm director of the Ketchikan Public Library in Ketchikan, Alaska. And the title of my chapter is Many Fronts, the Ketchikan Public Library and the Culture Wars. And so this is a very concrete, very local look at our experience with various kinds of challenges over the past, I think, 3.5 years. It started in the fall of 2021 when we did a display of a local publication called Loud and Queer, which was a collection of stories, sort of a quarterly journal of stories by local LGBTQ authors. And there was a Facebook objection to that display, and which led to a defunding effort, which led to book challenges, which led to a lot of controversy over our 2022 Drag Queen Storytime. And the chapter just describes all of these, one after the other, of these challenges, how we initially responded to these, what we did wrong, and what we've learned to do differently. And yeah, so the chapter kind of ends at in the fall of 2023. And certainly the challenges have continued since then. But that's basically what my chapter is about. So I'll end there.
Thanks so much. Next up, we have Phoebe Doyle joining us from Ireland.
I was going to say good evening, everybody, because where I am, it's about 6 p.m., so a bit of a time difference there. But I just wanted to say it's a massive privilege to be in a space which such fantastic chapter contributors and to listen to all of your chapters and your stories. It's really wonderful. And I'm a civil servant in the Department of Children in the Republic of Ireland, and my chapter is entitled The Closeted Collections, an Analysis of LGBTQ plus Censorship in Irish secondary school libraries. So basically, about 2021, when I was completing my MLIS, similar to what Jordan was saying earlier on, when we were looking at the subject of censorship in university, there was a bunch of literature about censorship taking place in the US and the UK, but there was, and including materials mentioning LGBTQ plus censorship, be it in books or what was happening at the news at the time, but there was practically nothing either course-wise or my own research about what was happening in Ireland. At the time, there were a few mutterings of protests in Ireland, and actually, since I had written my chapter, the number has increased, and I kind of wanted to put my own voice out there in trying to piece together the landscape of what was happening in Ireland at the time, and that's still applicable now, and what librarians can do to try and combat that, or make a toolkit that they can apply to their own practices, and how best to do right by LGBTQ plus or even like ally students in school spaces, that people have the information they need to go forth in life and be completely happy in themselves and the perspective of themselves. So it was a bunch of different components putting together, trying to put a firm definition of censorship, because I think it's a word that's flung out there colloquially, and people have a perception of what censorship is in their head, but trying to bring together both internal and external censorship and how they can meet within the library space. And I had the privilege as well of interviewing a secondary school librarian and finding out on the ground of what was happening in one particular space. A lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff that gave me a lot of hope, and then using that to try and put together bits of what librarians in Ireland and really worldwide that people can look at and see how they can try and get the text that they need to students who need them. So that's basically trying to put my chapter in a nutshell, and I hope that at least garners a little bit of interest.
Thanks so much, Phoebe. Next up, we have Kestrel Ward.
All right, I am Kestrel Ward. I am not turning on my video because I have very bad internet, but I did put up a little profile picture of me so you can see what I look like. I live in North Central Florida, and I work for Florida Virtual Campus, where I work with digital archives and open education. And the title of my chapter is Disappearing Queers, a survey of queer material accessibility in mainstream archives. And the entry point for me and my co-writer, my co-author, uh, uh, Evangeline Jaconia, was a survey that we did in 2023 spring, I think, of archives across the United States and how they were making their LGBTQ materials findable and accessible and how they were using them. Due to the vagaries of academic publishing, that study has not yet been published, although I'm hoping for it this spring. But we really went into our chapter looking at the ways that LGBTQ people have been erased in the archive, either through intent by archivists and family members, or through poor metadata, keeping them hidden in the greater archive, because nobody knows to look for them as LGBTQ people. And so we were really looking at that. We were using the data from our survey, the responses from our survey to kind of inform us about what US archives are doing now with these things, and also as kind of ideas on how to combat this and ways to rectify the silences in the archive that are around queer people. And that is kind of what our chapter is about.
All right, thanks so much, Kestrel. Next up, we have James Rosenzweig. I'm sure I mispronounced that, James.
No worries, Jason. Thanks. Hello, folks. It's great to be here. I'm James Rosenzweig. I'm a professor on the library faculty at Eastern Washington University, over here in Cheney, Washington, just over the mountains from Bryn. And I'm our education and children's studies librarian. I'm speaking on behalf of my co-authors, Alicia Vandering, who's at the University of Rhode Island, and Amanda Malilly, who's at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Our chapter title is Here, Queer, but Catalog Records Aren't Used to It, the Discoverability of LGBTQIA plus Representation in Library Collections. What Alicia and Amanda and I sort of brought to the table here is sort of along the lines of what Kestrel was just sharing about the ways that metadata leaves representation and inclusion invisible in libraries. We have been working, we've read hundreds of picture books, classifying them in terms of their LGBTQIA plus representation and the kinds of narratives that represented members of the LGBTQIA plus communities how they represent, what kinds of narratives are told. So that's been a focus of our research for a while, but we realized this was an opportunity for us to examine something that we anecdotally had started to notice and were interested in, the ways in which our subject headings in the catalog either do or don't do a good job of labeling representation. We wondered whether the increasing use of other kinds of controlled vocabularies, and particularly homosaurus, we wondered how much that might change things. We also wondered whether we'd done some work examining book reviews, capsule book reviews for language around representation. And we wondered whether the summaries that appear for those books in the catalog were doing as good a job, better or worse, than capsule book reviews in making that kind of representation visible. And so that's what the chapter examines. We're we're thinking of this as a test for more than just picture books, but that's the material we had that we knew so well, that we knew we could compare what we knew about this corpus of picture book material to how those books are being represented in WorldCat and what kinds of summaries and catalog language are used around them. And we found some things we expected and some things that were a little unexpected, but it was certainly a great journey to take and hopefully a chapter that's of interest to you all.
Thank you so much, James. Last up amongst our authors is Ernani Agulto, joining us from the Philippines.
Hi everyone. I believe it's afternoon there, so I have to greet everyone good afternoon. It's actually 2:25 a.m. here in the Philippines. So I'm Ernani Agulto. I'm a licensed librarian and teacher. And also I'm also the gender and development focal person at the Quezon City Public Library here in the Philippines. So the title of my article is Queering the Undisturbed, Reflections on the Construction of Queer Space Through LGBT Materials and Programs at the Quezon City Public Library. And my initial thought about this article was that I have this idea of space being central to history and experience of the LGBTQ community. And as a queer identifying person, I want to create the discourse on space and library programming framed and informed by one of the authors here in the Philippines, Edson Cabalfin, of his idea of queer space, where he asserted an appropriation of meaning of space. And given the predisposition of what space is, I want to somehow share that it's also how we engage with space and how we interact with space that will enable us to somehow clear uncontested spaces, especially in public libraries. So basically, I also shared here in my article how we conducted the Pride Month celebration back in 2021, and I also indicated some recommendation and parang sort of toolkit on how they can also do their own activities during Pride Month. So hopefully that will help those who will read my article. So basically that's it.
Thank you so much. And so we're going to move on to the Q&A portion of our time with you today. We've prepared some questions that we're going to answer, both Jordan and I and the co-authors, and we'll also have time for questions from our audience. I'm going to put the first question in the chat, but the question is, in light of the current cultural situation, what do you think the future of intellectual freedom looks like? And before I open it up to the rest of our panelists, I want to kind of jump in on this and then give Jordan a chance to answer. When we first submitted the manuscript to the publisher in March of last year, Jordan and I, the signs seemed promising that this might just become a book of history, a book documenting a chapter in our history. We really thought that we might be turning a corner in the country, that the pendulum might be swinging the other way. And things did not go like that, as we know. So this book is needed now more than ever, I think, to help our community to face these challenges that are ahead of us. I know, speaking for myself, I do feel like there's a chilling effect to be a queer librarian, to be openly out, to be publishing about queer topics. It's a little bit of a frightening prospect in the current environment. And it's one that I approach with a little bit of apprehension, and maybe that's going to kind of guide my activities in the future. I'll have to be a little more careful, a little more cautious, maybe pursue some other interests instead. And that's unfortunate because, I have views, I have a voice, and I've been advocating for the queer community since I started out as a librarian many moons ago. Jordan?
I think one thing that we've learned in the process of hearing the stories that went into this collection, and honestly in experiencing some of the things we've experienced, is that some people, due to circumstances and maybe due to their own resources, are going to have more of an ability to fight on behalf of intellectual freedom than others. We all need to make ends meet. We all need to keep our baseline of safety and comfort with the work that we're doing and the degree to which we're bringing our identities to work, but also the degree to which we, as information professionals, are fighting on behalf of intellectual freedom. Not everybody's going to be able to do that on the same level. People at universities, for example, with really strong protections in favor of intellectual freedom, they can be the change agents in charge of this. But others might feel like they don't have the ability to do that. And I think that's sort of part of the toolkit aspect of it. Intellectual freedom is going to be in the future as strong as the strongest people who are willing to defend it. They may have to take up the charge no matter what the intellectual climate, the cultural climate ends up looking like. And I do want to restate the point that Jason made. Basically, at the point when we submitted this manuscript, we really kind of thought this was going to be a historical document, which is useful in its own way. Historical documents, they're there for the future. But at this point, I think it's honestly difficult to tell where intellectual freedom is going to go, as evidenced by, the sort of whiplash events of just the past year or so. It's hard to get a read on it. It really is. And that uncertainty is something that I think we're going to have to sit with, in the knowledge that, well, the knowledge and the hope that there will be, some people, leading the charge in favor of intellectual freedom.
I'll open it up to our other panelists. Yes, Patricia.
So I've kind of thought about this a lot. To Jordan's point, as a public librarian, I feel a little less protected, although the community by and large has been amazing. But there aren't the kind of protections that there are in many academic circumstances. However, in my personal circumstance, I'm close enough to retirement that's also a factor. And so I think it behooves us, those of us who are kind of less vulnerable, to take up that standard and to kind of take the chance of being out there and being heard and standing up for intellectual freedom. And it was really interesting to me that kind of throughout history, there are times when, for one reason or another, intellectual freedom is under attack. And I think this is the latest version of that. I'm very hopeful that because there are so many people who feel so passionately and who are able to stand up and fight for intellectual freedom and its value to our communities, that this too shall pass. And so I am kind of tentatively hopeful that this is a phase that we will kind of work our way through. But working our way through it will depend on people standing up and being heard.
Bren?
Yeah, hi. I've thought about this a little bit as well, and I think my take on it seems to vary from day to day. As a queer science journalist, I've been watching with apprehension, a lot of the cuts that have happened throughout the sciences, health sciences, cancer funding, anything having to do with global warming, anything having to do with DEI, with inclusion. There's a lot of health disparities that have been the focus of a lot of good and necessary research. Those are now being erased and actively defunded. So there's a lot of challenge there. I think one of the things that has become apparent from things like the Stand Up for Science rallies around the country is the idea of strength in numbers, and the people who have a platform and maybe a little bit more security to use their voice. And I think as we've seen, when there is a movement, when there are a lot of voices, when a lot of universities can come together and protest some of the changes, some of the very active threats to intellectual freedom, I think that can be powerful. As a science communicator, I also think that there is a mission that I have and others in my profession to be very clearly articulate the stakes. What are we losing when we lose intellectual freedom? Not just for the intellectuals, but the rest of the country, the rest of society. And so I think some of that is reflected in the book. But even beyond that, I think definitely standing up and saying something, and those who have a voice, who maybe have a little bit more safety of using that platform now while we still can.
Castro, I think you were next.
Yeah, so one of particularly in the realm of queer studies and things, I expect that intellectual freedom is going to go a little underground. But the people are going to keep doing this work, but they're going to be quieter about it. They're going to not put it out on the web so much. And one thing that I've been thinking about since the book came out, due to all of so I'm in Florida, and we have been, the United States is kind of speed running as a whole what Florida and Texas, but Florida as well, have been doing for the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm used to the ways in which people keep doing the work, but call it other things, or do it quieter, things like that. And in our chapter, we were very much, our toolbox part was very much encouraging people to kind of come out of that silence, those silences, and speak louder, and make things more available and easier to find. And since the book has come out, I've been kind of thinking about that and wondering if that is even the best advice in this current moment. Just from a safety perspective, I'm worried about the safety of archivists who do make their collections very visible, and who do try to promote them widely. And I'm also worried about the safety of the collections themselves, and especially those collections that are in government or government adjacent archives, such as public institutions of higher education, the National Archives and all of their many satellite archives and things like that. And so it would not at all be the first time in history that queer collections have been destroyed by governments. And it wouldn't be the first time that, queer intellectual thought has gone underground. And so I anticipate that there's going to be a period similar to that where everything's a bit quieter, but it still happens because there's a lot of people who are very passionate about this kind of work and are unwilling to stop producing this kind of intellectual output, even if they may have to put it in a vault somewhere for a while before it's made widely public. So that's kind of where I think it's going.
Thanks, Kestrel. James?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to minimize the problems we're facing right now and the things that Kestrel is talking about in terms of safety are such huge concerns. I'm fortunate for lots of reasons. Among them that I am a tenured faculty member and I'm a member of a union. Like I think, like Pat was saying, I think I'm in a position to continue speaking longer and more safely than a lot of other folks, and so I intend to keep doing that. I think though that it is important to remember, at least when I was reflecting on this question, what I kept coming back to is the fact that I think it's going to be the nature of intellectual freedom that it's always contested because it threatens those in power. That's why we love it, and that's why there will always be peril. I don't. Again, I don't want to suggest that that means that what's happening now is either normal or acceptable. It's absolutely not. But I read sometimes I go back and I read the American Library Association's Freedom to Read statement because it fires me up. If you haven't read it lately, I think you should, and it'll fire you up. But the sentence that I always repeat, and I repeat to my students sometimes, is that freedom is a dangerous way of life, but it is ours. And that doesn't mean that I embrace the dangers that are posed to us right now. But it reminds me that what I'm advocating for is a world that is free, and that freedom is going to threaten folks who are in a position of power. And so I need to be ready to be resilient for some of that work. And again, folks are going to have to pursue that work in different ways. And like Kestrel says, maybe in underground ways. I hate to believe that that's where we're going, but I also recognize the truth there. But I think it's good for us to remember that this work is going to, I don't know if we'll ever turn a corner in a way that we don't have to continue to defend what we believe about freedom.
Thank you, James. Ernani, I saw your hand pop up. Did you want to speak?
Actually, just listening to what my co-panel just mentioned, and I'm just wondering how, as a Filipino, I will be like affected by this current situation, especially happening in America. But I'd like to touch on what James had mentioned, that regardless of situation, I think there will always be threats to what queer people do, especially in the libraries, because it basically questions those who are in power, and because of that, um, uh, they will continue to do whatever it takes to 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 practice their power onto us. And as librarians, regardless where you are in, even if it's you are in the country where, let's say, in America or in Asia, I think you have a certain moral obligation to speak when it comes to these kinds of concerns. Also, we have to constantly also speak against these threats. So that's it.
All right, thanks. So we'll move on to our next question, which is, what advice would you give to anyone facing a challenge? Jordan?
So I think my answer would be on two fronts, and there's a lot to unpack here, so I'll try to go through it quickly. So for one thing, when you're facing a challenge, really you should have begun at the point before the challenge even happens. To any library, academic, public, school, whatever, that even has the hint that there might be a challenge coming up at some point, have a collection development policy in place. Have a strong collection development policy that explicitly, permits the kind of materials that you might suspect might be under challenge at some point. Have a consideration policy. Basically, do all the things in terms of policy that can sort of steel you in advance for something like this. And that way you won't be caught unawares when something like this arises. So that's really the first part of it, is it's policy. And that's something that we learn about it in library school, but we don't always necessarily have the chance to apply it practically until, something dire happens in our library. And so that's a big part of it. The other part, I think, is simply know your community and talk to your community and have an investment in your community. If people think that the library is this, quasi-hostile alien agency in the midst of them that's here to, import the nightmare of, drag queens reading stories and all these sinister LGBTQ materials, they're not going to have as much of an investment in it as they would if they know the value of the library and what it does for them. If you know your community and you know the stakeholders in your community, you can say, hey, this stuff is not scary. This stuff is here to help people who might not think exactly like you, but who are part of your community as well. So I guess that's the other part of what I would give to somebody facing a challenge. And that, I guess, is also kind of a preparing yourself in advance aspect of the situation. You want to have that foothold in your community before a challenge rises. But you also have to, know who your advocates are in the community if a challenge does arise, so that you can turn to them, because a library will not necessarily be advocating on its own behalf. It'll have to bring in other people.
Thanks, Jordan. Kestrel?
So Jordan started to kind of go in a little to what I would say, but I would say to reach out to the community when challenges arise. Um, Generally speaking, the wider community is pretty supportive of libraries and library programming and even LGBTQ people, but a lot of them don't know when an issue is arising. They're not plugged into what's happening with a library or an archive. We just had a local issue with our public library and a event that I'm organizing from within the public library. We actually got a challenge because I'm organizing a trans focused event, and we were able to just reach out to people that we knew in the community who had the ear of people in with more institutional power than we did. And we had community backing us up in reaching out, and we were actually able to resolve the issue to our satisfaction, just by letting and the people that we reached out to had no idea that such an issue was coming up, because a lot of times these issues are kind of behind closed doors in some ways. So yeah, I would just echo, not just to already have an existing relationship with your community, but when problems pop up, to actually reach out to the community as a whole and say, hey, we need your support right now, and this is how you can help us to resolve this. And that's kind of my big advice.
Thanks, Kestrel. Pat?
see here. Okay. All right. So, yes, community support is so important. It was so important for us in the build up to the drag queen story time. In the build up to that day, there was a lot of back and forth. But on the actual day itself, there was so many people came out in support of the library compared to the number of people who were objecting to the event. Just having those connections in the community, both pre-existing and the connections you make as the controversy begins and continues, are really important. But what I wanted to also add is that when all of this started for us and people were coming in to object to collections or object to programs, I had so hoped that I would be so eloquent that I would be able to convince them of the error of their ways. And I think when you're facing a challenge, I think one thing that it's hard to realize is that there are many, many people that you are never going to convince, and that you can be as willing to speak, willing to listen, but oftentimes those conversations just stop and go nowhere. And not to feel defeated by that, but to be willing to kind of go on and have the next conversation, even with the knowledge that it may not change that person's mind or the people in that group's mind. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Pat. Bren?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everyone said. It's funny, I had a list of bullet points, and I think they've already been articulated. Definitely identifying allies and involving the community. I think also developing a safety plan. And I just wanted to talk about one specific example and how it relates to stochastic terrorism or even threats. There have been a number of events that have been disrupted by some extremist groups, the Proud Boys among them. And one very effective technique that communities have used is basically just sort of disrupting this made for YouTube video with things as simple as colorful umbrellas, rainbow umbrellas. There's a nonprofit called the Parasol Patrol, and they have basically used some strategies that other members of the queer community have used for a number of years, and basically providing a visual shield for parents and children coming in for Drag Queen Story Hour, for example. What it also does is it also is a very powerful symbol of community support for the libraries and the librarians. And it also sort of disrupts the idea that this extremist group is coming into the community and going to intimidate them. When you have a number of people going by and holding up these very oversized, colorful umbrellas, that disrupts the narrative. And so that can be one, simple but actually quite effective way to to disrupt some of these events. So that would be the example that I would use.
Thanks, Bren. And Phoebe?
I think, like with everybody else, a lot of what I might contribute to the answer to that question has already been answered. But I know in my chapter, I talk a little bit about kind of e-readers and kind of accessing texts online. And especially if we're talking about outreaching to the community and especially trying to get young people on board, sometimes doing that either via social media or advertising ways to read text either at home or anywhere kind of online, kind of e-readers can be useful. I suppose the only issue the main large issue that would come to my mind with social media is how it can be such a double-edged sword, especially in the world we live in, where there can be dog piles or somebody sees one post and decides, okay, we know, let's go to this event and, cause a havoc. But I think that it's supposed the time that we're in where there's a lot of text being challenged, knowing that there is a electronic backup that can be accessed either at the moment or just knowing that you can dip into that at some point in the future, even if a physical text isn't accessible, is at least for the moment, I hope, a little bit of an extra safety net when we're kind of worried about certain texts either being banned or there's been challenges there, knowing that there is somewhere down the road access to an electronic copy until you can get a physical copy back again. I'm a massive proponent of having, physical texts in libraries and getting people interested in the physical space of the library, because I do believe that the atmosphere and the sense of being within your own community outside of the four walls of your house can be greatly beneficial, both just to get that sense of community and your own mental health. But that's at least one difference I'm thinking in comparison to a lot of book bannings from decades ago that might be to our advantage today. I hope that's not too waffly, but that's at least something that we can, I suppose, as the years go on, we can try and hash out a more perfect solution to that issue.
Thanks so much. So at this point, and just being kind of mindful of the time, I'd like to open the floor up for questions that our authors may have of their editors, or may have of each other, or for our attendees that are here. What questions do you have? Just raise your hand and we'll call on you.
We do have another half hour still, so I think we might actually have time for our third question if
well, I kind of think we addressed the third question, like just listening to some of the responses.
Yeah, good point.
So, and I just wanted to kind of open it up and give everyone plenty of time. We are scheduled for another 30 minutes, but I wanted to open it up to questions from our authors, from our panel. If you have questions of each other, of your editors, or open it up to our attendees, what questions do you think that you may have of us that we can answer? James.
Yeah, I mean, just a question for you, Jason and Jordan. You were talking about sort of how you had conceived the volume, and then how much has felt like it's been changing, obviously, and has actually been changing in the last 12 months. Knowing what you know now in March of 25, would you have done anything differently in terms of how you pitched this, how you framed it, what the book would have been if you had the ability to know sort of where we were going? Or is this just what it needed to be and we're fortunate?
I think, speaking for myself, this ended up being what we needed it to be. Just kind of seeing the listservs, there are others in the academic community that are kind of doing these calls for proposals now for instances of censorship in academic libraries. So I feel like we were kind of well placed with when we did our call for proposals and when the book was published, that we've kind of gotten a jump on some of our other colleagues and getting our ideas out there. In terms of how I would conceptualize the book differently, I mean, I think what the product we ended up with, I feel like, is kind of perfect for the moment that we're in. Like I said at the beginning, it's really helpful that we have some of those intro chapters like Bren's to kind of set the intellectual staging so that people can understand why are we seeing these challenges, what's motivating these challenges, and then the examples that we were able to pull in from our panelists, from our other co-authors, I think really have covered our bases really well. Jordan?
I honestly, yeah, I could try to come up with areas where maybe we fell short or whatever. But honestly, the book it's not really Jason and me. It's our contributors, and I think they did an outstanding job with this. I guess one thing that I might add, but honestly, this is difficult to achieve because again, it's on the contributors. I mean, the angle that I think just by dint of our being in the United States and some of your contributors being in the United States, the angle that we ended up taking is a little bit Americentric. It's specific to U.S. politics and developments in U.S. politics. And I think one sort of aspect of the global political landscape that's been overlooked maybe a little bit is the United States is not necessarily the only one facing these repressive attitudes toward LGBTQ, intellectual freedom and thought and whatnot. I don't know how this could have played out differently, but I would be intrigued to see even more global takes on the matter from from Europe or whatever, just dealing with what's going on in other countries with respect to the intellectual landscape there, and maybe unique strategies from non-American countries for dealing with these situations. Again, I don't know how we could have made that happen because we took the wonderful contributions that we got, but in an alternate universe, that would have intrigued me.
I mean, I think IFLA is working on that book now, on getting more of that global perspective on censorship. There was a call for proposals earlier this year for chapters on that, so we may see that book come out in the next, if it's on the same timeline we were, it'll probably come out in 2027. Other questions from our panelists or from our audience?
And not just questions either, but if anybody has additional thoughts that they've been, because there's Bryn.
I just wanted to piggyback on that and just say I'm actually would be really interested to hear from Ernani and Phoebe in terms of what lessons they would offer or to people in the US, and if they think that the climate is improving or getting worse in Ireland and the Philippines respectively. So just to piggyback, I guess, on what you said, we do have a couple international representatives here, so I'd be really curious to get their take on, compare and contrast where they are with what they're seeing in the US.
I might jump on that first if that's not too cheeky of me, if that's okay. I suppose when I wrote my chapter started as my final university paper, because both censorship, well, that was a topic that interests me. And then as an LGBT person, I thought, well, it's kind of the perfect niche to work in. And I wrote it from the perspective of being always an optimist, even though that breaks your heart a lot of the time, and thinking, okay, if things were to steadily get worse, the climate of basically of libraries and attitudes to LGBT texts, be it in school libraries or anywhere else, what would be the best advice I could provide to somebody based on the research I had done, and kind of preparing it again in hopes that, a bit like what Jordan and Jason said, this could be used in maybe a historic document, but maybe it might not be something that would have to be used very soon. But I did find that after finishing the chapter and sending it over, that there have been more protests and more social media outrage about LGBT texts. And I know there's been even a couple of television hour-long kind of news documentaries about it. And nothing too recently, but it's enough that it kind of puts you on edge a little bit. So I am really happy that the book is coming out now. One, that any of our chapters, because they all really sound fabulous from what I've heard tonight, might get like attention from people working in libraries, that they can try and get like a little plan together, both in their own communities and maybe for wider kind of, I would say branches, but wider kind of library organizations here. And especially as we're going to see how the next few years goes, see if the climate here will mimic the US in many ways, or if we'll swerve and take another direction. And I'm hoping that, in both states and pretty much everywhere, that things will improve, and that us releasing our works might contribute something, however may small, it might contribute to that in some way.
Perfect. Thank you, Phoebe. Ernani?
Okay. So I wrote my excuse me, my article I wrote my article in this book thinking of just sharing my experience as a librarian and a gender and development focal person of our library, the Kansas City Public Library. And coming from a third world country, we have our own um, limitations in terms of resources, and I want to share how I was able to navigate um those challenges and was able to to um to um uh develop a program and also deliver the activities and programs during the Pride 2021. And I think that that's the whole idea of my article. And um uh comparing with the practices in the US, I think we all have our own share of uh say uh let's say problems when it comes to uh different resources. And I believe that I can somehow relay my own experience and hopefully can share those learnings through my article. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you. So we've got a question from our audience. Do you ever or consider writing under a pseudonym? And did anyone look at this in the studies? So I'll get started on this. I'll toss it to Jordan and then open it up to our panel. For this book and the chapters that I co-authored, no, I was happy to do it in my name. I did at the time, it didn't really seem as much of a concern. And I'm still not concerned about having my name attached to this book and the chapters now. I feel like that, the things that we wrote about, we did so in a respectful, unbiased fashion. That well, I mean, folks are going to find offense if they're looking for it, but it just addresses the needs to have a collection development policy, or challenges from with internal censorship and how we address those, and then talking about queer battle fatigue, just speaking about those in kind of a generalized sense. I didn't have any concern about that. We I've participated in other publications from Library Juice Press where I know some of the other authors published under a pseudonym. So that's why we made that available for our authors. Jordan?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I'm kind of privileged in that I work, in an academic setting where we do have the protection of administration. Like, I have no doubt that, if somebody came screaming out of the woodwork about how terrible and inappropriate this is, our administration would laugh it off, basically. But I can also understand completely why somebody might be concerned about that. Actually, our current project beyond censorship is a drag is a book dealing with it's a book dealing with Harry Potter and how people deal with J.K. Rowling got weird in 2020, and basically the book contends with how people deal with Harry Potter as a cultural object after that. And we very openly offered up to our authors the ability to write under pseudonyms because people in Rowling World are known for doxing and attacking people, and that was something we were mindful of in this project as well. We offered up the ability to our authors to contribute under pseudonyms so that they could have protection, because not everybody's in a privileged situation.
And I'll note that in our correspondence with the authors, that we created a Gmail account for that the names of the editors are not attached publicly to that book at this time. And I even went to the trouble of trying to scrub as much of my personal information online as possible. Um, I don't know if my other co-editors have gone to as much lengths as I did, just because I didn't want to be harassed in my personal life for my association with this book. Kestrel?
Yeah, so for me, any writing I do on subjects like these are professional writings that I'm a new professional in libraries and archives, and I've only been doing this for 5 years. And this is the kind of work that I want to do. And so I am building my portfolio, I guess, as you would say, to building my CV to include um, all of the things that I write about this. And I write under my own name on social media about these topics. I have a blog that I write about these topics with that is also um, connected to my my real name, um, and I kind of am like this is what I want to do, so I need to be able to show that I am capable of doing this kind of work, and I can't do that if all of it's hidden behind a pseudonym. Um, for the first time this spring, I have been considering some things under a pseudonym, not professional writing so much, more personal, um, more personalized things like around disability or um, experiences being trans and things like that. So um, I haven't decided. I don't have any prospects immediately in the future for anything to write, and so I haven't decided come to a decision about that. But it has been the first time that I've thought about doing that, just because um, it is becoming so dangerous. Um, but at the same time, like I said, I am all over the internet already talking about these issues and being vocally out and vocally um, part of the resistance um, to censorship and things of that nature. So, um, yeah, I would say I did not ever consider writing under a pseudonym for this book. Um,
James?
Yeah, uh, much like Kestrel, I'm in the academic world where we're building CVs and things. I'm in a stage in my career where that pressure is less severe, but still, yeah, I didn't really think about a pseudonym, and in part because of, as I've acknowledged, there's lots of ways in which I'm more protected. But I do want to acknowledge a sort of an adjacent issue that has really been a topic of conversation between myself and my co-authors, Alicia and Amanda, around the impact of our project. Because what we are trying to do, what we will accomplish once we're done, we're hundreds of books into it at this point, is a really comprehensive listing of children's picture books published in the United States that depict in any way some kind of LGBTQIA plus representation. Um, a list like that can be weaponized by folks like the so-called Moms for Liberty. And so we do struggle a little bit. And I don't know that we have a good answer yet for exactly why we're doing what we're doing, or at least why we're being public about it, other than to say that we think that we think that the benefits of getting information about inclusion and representation into the hands of librarians and teachers and parents is worth the potential risk of exposing those books to more public scrutiny. But I would understand someone reaching a different conclusion, and that conversation's still live between the three of us in terms of how we want to publicize it and where, because yeah, there are a lot of risks to a lot of folks, and we want to make sure we're being thoughtful in the decisions we're making.
Thank you, James. Phoebe?
I'm in a slightly different boat from James and Castro, only in the fact that this is my first major publication of any kind. And whether or not I wanted to have a pseudonym there instead of my name was something I had thought about even before I found out about this project. Just thinking that, okay, I've worked on something that I'm very proud of. And I think that, given to the, people working in libraries, both in Ireland and elsewhere, it could hopefully do a lot of good, but would I be prepared for any just repercussions of if people on social media wants to start a dog pile, or like what was mentioned with the J.K. Rowling publication, if there was a doxing, just because I'm very much a catastrophizing person. And it was something that I had toyed with. I would go from, no, I want my name there, to, oh, maybe it's safer if I just pop a different name instead, or just something that no one can trace. I know in the interview I did with the school in Dublin, as much as I would love to just shout the name for the rooftops, because they were absolutely very supportive, lovely people, and it gave me a lot of hope, I did keep them anonymous in the chapter just for their own safety. And when I had thought, actually, in mid 2023, that was kind of my point, when there was a lot of stuff going on in Ireland about protests. And I remember I called my mum and I was thinking, should I really go and put my name there instead? And I 100% support anyone else's conclusion if they want to use a pseudonym instead. Absolutely, because it's it's a very scary thought about putting yourself out there like that. I think regardless of if you have a big publication history or not. And I remember we were talking, and so the conclusion that we were both kind of coming to is, especially considering about my chapter being on mentioning internal censorship, I'm thinking I had thought, especially for an Irish context, since there's so little about censorship in Irish libraries, that wouldn't mean, even though it's like an academic book, I'm thinking if a young person picked it up and saw someone's name, that at least they can kind of put a pointed recognition that, okay, that's someone in this country who has put themselves out there in support of me or other people like me, and trying to get the word out, and really trying to help us and people who come after us and get our voices out there, and make sure that we're not silenced, we're not pushed into the sidelines anymore, we're not going to let people trample on us. And that was the point. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. And a bit like what was said before, I took precautions with my own social media, that there was nothing really traceable about my own specific location, aside from the fact that I'm Irish. But I did feel, once I had made that decision, that it was the best one for me, because one, that I was proud of the work I did, and two, even if I chose someone else's name that sounded convincing, if that, like, one that I had completely made up, the fact that I know that someone might just see my own name there and know, okay, that's someone who's really put themselves out there. Maybe we can try and get our voices out there too. We'll be a group. There's a community here. We're not going to be alone if we try and speak out. That meant the world to me more than anything else.
Thanks, Phoebe. Pat?
Okay, let me get all this stuff done. Okay. So actually wanted to comment on the work that James and their colleagues are doing about picture books, and making sure that they are properly cataloged, and those inclusive elements are included. One of the criticisms that we received for our catalog from people who were, I think, looking to protect their children from certain kinds of subject matters, is that it wasn't obvious from our subject headings or from the summaries that there were LGBTQIA characters or situations. And so there is the possibility of, in making those summaries more specific, and to really indicate which books have those elements in them. They can be more targeted, but it also, and what I think is so much more important, it's also easier for young people who are looking for those kinds of stories that want to feel like they can identify with people in the stories. To have those catalog records actually reflect that, so that people can more easily find those materials. I think that is so important. And so I really applaud the work that you're doing. And I think it's very important to be able to have those descriptions accurately reflect what's in the books. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Pat. Ernani, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want to also speak?
Yes. I think Phoebe and I are somehow similar. This is also my first publication, and after knowing the idea of behind behind this project, I did not consider using a pseudonym because I think I want also to really know how to I want also to somehow relay the idea of having the author's name in such publication. Um, Somehow uh, I want to put out there that there's a human behind this article, and also um, I want to somehow represent where I came from, and um, uh, let the readers relate to my own experience. So that's basically it.
All right, thank you. So we've got another question that came in from one of our attendees. I'm going to read it out loud. It's interesting to hear that there was not a significant amount of literature on censorship, libraries, and LGBTQ communities. I wonder what possible connections or shared strategies might be available between libraries and other cultural institutions. Thinking of highly covered historical efforts to censor NEA-funded artworks, curious if anyone has any thoughts on this. And sorry, I forgot to turn my camera on. Just to clarify, when Jordan and I started out with the book, our series editor asked us to do kind of an environmental scan of, what all is out there. And I want to be clear that there is quite a bit about censorship in public libraries and school libraries. And also kind of tying that in with the LGBTQ community. But we did not see any or a great deal of scholarship about censorship of LGBTQ materials in academic libraries. So that, we started out with kind of that germ of an idea. And that's also something that we talk about in at least a couple of our chapters. And one chapter where we're talking about collection development policies, we talk about how there really isn't a lot of scholarship about academic libraries and this form of censorship towards this community. In the second chapter, we talk specifically about instances of censorship that happened in the academic library that we were working in. So those haven't really come to the surface, and it's interesting that it hasn't. There is a really great book that came out in the early 90s talking about gay librarianship, and there was a chapter in there that talked about censorship. And that really was kind of the most recent thing that we've seen, and we did cite that chapter. In terms of how this applies with other libraries and other cultural institutions, I'll just kind of open that up for Jordan and the other panelists.
I thought that this is a really interesting question because I'm fascinated by the whole NEA phenomenon, and I honestly kind of hadn't considered that that relation before. But really, so many of the same arguments are there. We have the same arguments about community standards and the taxpayers, and why are you doing these things in a situation where children can come see these. So honestly, thank you for asking this question because I would love to dig into literature and see if anybody else has drawn these connections before. I didn't find it in our initial lit review, but and I'm not a museum person, so honestly, I'm not I can't say for sure whether, our prescriptions about collection development and whatnot would apply in the museum context, but I'm gonna go do some work on the subject because I'm intrigued.
And go ahead, Brent.
Okay. I think it's a fascinating question. I think one of the things that it brings up for me is a sort of larger attack on public institutions. So, I mean, you think about libraries, you think about this goes back to, intellectual freedom, right? Artistic freedom, freedom to, free people read freely. So there have been, a lot of systematic attacks, and I think you can draw a line between a lot of attacks on degenerate art, right? I mean, even going back to the 30s and 40s. And I was in New York, living at the time when then Mayor Rudy Giuliani attacked several museums for displaying art that he did not like, and he threatened to pull funding. So we're seeing the same thing now, right? Only magnet or even enlarged. But at the time, there was a big court case he lost because it's a First Amendment right. We're now seeing broader attacks on the First Amendment. So I think it is probably an interesting and worthwhile exercise to more clearly draw the lines for the public of this is not the only public institution that's under attack for content that people oppose on ideological grounds. And so I think there is a space here maybe to draw this out in a larger way that shows what's at stake. And this is words, this is art, performance art, this is intellectual freedom. These are all these public institutions, and a lot of it goes back to First Amendment rights. So yeah, no, great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Kestrel?
So one of the things that I do on the side is I am a ALA counselor on the council. And since getting involved with that, I have realized how much behind the scenes work is happening at the level of ALA um, to protect libraries and archives. And there's a huge publicity arm of the ALA that does all kinds of outreach to community across the country, but there's also a really big legislative arm of the ALA that does direct talks with legislators, um, you know, explaining the necessary parts of libraries and explaining the necessity of free people read freely and how libraries support democracy and things like that to the people who are in the power to affect positive change. And so one thing I would wonder about other public institutions is if they have professional associations like the ALA that are doing that same legislative work. And if not, what can be done to start with start that kind of legislative work and that kind of public facing uh, uh, outreach and education of communities. That would be kind of my suggestion about that. And like the NEA itself does a certain amount of that, but the NEA is owned by the government, I guess, in a way. Whereas with like an organization like with ALA, it's totally separate from the government. And so there's a lot more freedom for ALA to advocate for libraries than there is for the people at the NEA to advocate for arts. And so that's just something I was thinking about.
Thanks so much, Kestrel. We are at time. We've got one more question, so I'm gonna ask our panelists to be brief in your response if you can. But I do want to make a stab at the question. And thank you, Tanya. What's something positive or unexpected that you've discovered while navigating the topic of censorship? And for me, I just want to say like how wonderful and awesome it was to be a part of this project, to hear the stories from the authors in this project with the work that they're doing, the challenges that they faced, and kind of the innovative solutions that they propose. It just, I know awesome's kind of an overused word, but it really was like I was struck with a great deal of awe with just the poise and professionalism that our colleagues in this effort showed, and facing these situations or coming up with their solutions. Anyone else want to chime in? Jordan and then Bren, or go ahead, Bren.
Sorry, I'll be really quickly. The Parasol Patrol was one example. I just was kind of blown away by the creativity and the resiliency of some of these communities and the ways in which they involved allies in the communities to, in some cases, just push out some of the extremists and, say, we're not going to be intimidated and cowed by your tactics. And, we're able to basically successfully defend, in some cases, literally defend libraries from some of these actions. So that was just a really positive thing that I encountered.
Thanks, Bren. Jordan?
I just wanted to co-sign what Jason said. The resilience of information professionals, not just the people who are, the wonderful stories that we've heard in our project but also, the people in the field, the other people in the field who maybe, didn't feel comfortable contributing or whatever, has been incredible. So even though it's a scary time for librarians and people who work in, information institutions, I really am, like Jason said, echoing him, awed by the resilience and the resources the people bring to the table and this stuff. That's the upside for me.
Other responses? Kestrel?
The thing that really struck me was when we were looking at the long responses from our survey, how many institutions talked about the things that they are already, the projects that they are already instituting to remedy the censorship that is in archives already, and how much progress they've been making. Really, it really gave me hope for the field as a whole.
That's great. Okay, well, we're a little past time. I want to thank our panelists, especially Phoebe and Ernani, for joining us today. We're going to be doing another book launch tomorrow where we'll hear from 6 other panelists. So our attendees, if you came in today and you've got time tomorrow, feel free to join us again, or this will be recorded and posted on YouTube. Share with your friends information about these virtual book launches, and let us know what you think about the book. It was a great experience for both Jordan and I to work on this project, to work with the publisher, and I just want to thank everyone for their involvement with it. Jordan?
It's been honestly, over the course of this project, it has been like getting to know a whole slew of new friends. We went from seeing these, like sort of like concise pitches about what a chapter was going to be to really getting a view into how somebody's mind worked and how they individually dealt with and grappled with these situations. And that is really, I thank our authors for allowing us to share this time with them, not just in this meeting, but also on the page and in the editorial process and in the work that we're all going to be sharing together in the future.
Yes, both Jordan and I learned so much from this process that we decided to step into the breach yet again with another book that we're going to be co-editing that'll hopefully be coming out in a couple of years about the topic we mentioned earlier about how we as a culture, as a profession, as the academy, do we grapple with J.K. Rowling and her creative works, after 2020 and kind of the emergence of her true colors, if you will. Sophie, did you have any final remarks?
Only to say this was fantastic. Thank you all very much. Emails will go out when this is available to share on YouTube. Until then, I hope everybody has a wonderful day and joins us again tomorrow if you can. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. This was great. It was so great meeting all of our authors, seeing them on screen. This was such a journey together, and I would love to do it again one day in the future if we have a chance.